Well, good evening. You know that I have missed you all terribly, and I know it's been 2 weeks since I've been here. I've been naughty. I was enjoying myself up by Skinwalker Ranch at the Vernal UFO Disclosure Conference, and I had a great time. It was so much fun for me to actually meet some of the people that I've been communicating with for a long, long time, to see old friends, and then to also see what was going on in my neck of the woods. The conference was beautifully done. I will say that the woman who organized the event worked really, really hard to put on a nice event. I really did meet some good people. I know that probably the Skinwalker crew wasn't super stoked to see me. And probably they shouldn't be, because, as you know, I have gone from being a 100% true believer and big supporter of the Skinwalker myth, and now I question everything about it. And being at that conference definitely gave me reason, should have given all of us reason to question it. It was very curious to see some of the speakers present, and I really did like what some of them had to say. But half of their speech, including Hynek, Dr. Hynek's son, which was great. He was talking about his son and, his father, and all of these wonderful memories that he had as a child. And then halfway through, we get into talking about cryptocurrency and NFTs and things like that. And so that was very curious to me, that was the common theme with more than one speaker. And then you learn a little bit more, and you start going into the world of, well, what is the owner of Skinwalker Ranch doing? Well, he's invested in a company called SafeMoon, which is dealing with a kind of cryptocurrency, and interestingly enough has made some waves, specifically with the FBI. I believe that there is a federal investigation against the company, along with some other reports that people have lost a considerable amount of money on SafeMoon. But I found that very, very curious. And for me, as somebody who wants to go to a UFO conference and I want to hear about UFOs, I want to hear about J. Allen Hynek, I want to hear about Skinwalker Ranch, or things that was just like, something seems rotten and, well, vernal, to say the least. Another couple things that happened during the conference, along with meeting some great people. I'll be on Alien Girl's show tomorrow night. I finally got to meet her. I'm excited about that. But I went up to Travis Taylor, and I enjoyed listening to him. He's very good, at presenting things. He's had a lot of experience in the acting field for a decade. And I asked him specifically, okay, you're claiming that you've been hurt by radiation, and this is a dangerous place. So what are you on the Skinwalker Ranch team doing to make sure that the community around the ranch is safe? And we're doing the TV show. So, again, it's just little comments like that. Last time I checked, I didn't think doing a TV show was exactly doing something, especially a TV show like that is helping a community. But, whatever, that's my own personal thought. And then we got to the talk with Dr. Jim Segala, again, a very interesting talk, and I enjoyed listening to it. Dr. Jim Segala was on the first, I think, and second season of the show, and he was mentioning the fact that Panama, the Havana syndrome, seems to be present in the 400 people that they have been researching, whatever that means, over the years, and specifically, people on the ranch. And it was very curious because he added in a statement that raised my hackles, not once but twice. And so for me, this was a little bit personal, but he mentioned that people that had been exposed to this UAP, UFOs, whatever it is at the ranch, came home, and sometimes they weren't nice to their families. So as you can imagine, what I think about that. I think that could have potentially been an attempt to try to run defense for some of the things that most of you know that I have been through recently. So anyway, it was very curious, very, very interesting to me. But like I said, it was fun to meet everybody, to see that influx of people in that area. Vernal really has grown so much, and it's such a cute place. And I want to say hello to my friends, Jody and Stacy, Utah Valley Campground. And they took myself and my friend Stephanie on a wonderful journey. We went up there on Saturday night, and they took us in the ATV. And so we got to go up and be on the top of the mesa, so you could get a wonderful view of the ranch. And it was just absolutely delightful. And I want to just really quick just kind of show you some photos. This is really cool. Okay, so that is, first of all, I can't wait to paint that. My painting will look nothing like that, but I have to say that this is the sky. This is what most of the sunsets look like in this area. It was absolutely stunning, even if there isn't anything paranormal going on. And then here I am taking my selfie, because, a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do up there. And that was really a wonderful time. Then I'm going to show you a couple photos. So this is inside the conference. And of course I was sitting at the back because, I love to kind of spy on people, look at people. I didn't say spy, you know what I mean? And then here is the panel when Avi Loeb was speaking. And, so anyway, it was very interesting. Okay, so this is my last thing that I'm going to say, because I'm babbling, me, I've got so much to share, and I'm learning more every day. But I want to raise a point that I think the UFO community should be talking a little bit more about. And of course we don't, because we don't seem to take any responsibility in this subject or question things when they need to be questioned. Given the recent and horrific, tragic shooting in Uvalde, Texas, I have to ask myself, what exactly is the History Channel doing? Here we've got real estate mogul who bought Skinwalker Ranch, and then we have a security guard there with the gun multiple times. And there's Post Malone down there with an assault rifle. Okay, so we know that there are people that are banding together to sue the gun owner, the gun manufacturer, in the Uvalde, Texas school shootings. And because they were potentially marketing to younger people. And what I have to ask the History Channel, and specifically the team at Skinwalker Ranch, is, who are you marketing to? Because last time I checked, there were people of all ages watching this show. And what are you trying to say when you have a security guard with an assault rifle? What do you need it for? Because let me just tell you, if you've got a mountain lion, you're not going to use an assault rifle. You would use the appropriate gun. And you most certainly, I don't think, would hope you'd be shooting at a shape-shifting werewolf, but I mean, Lord only knows, but we know that you really don't see any of those anyway. So to me, it is in very bad taste, and I would highly recommend any of you going to, hey, Alien Girl, going to the History Channel. There's a place there where you can either call in a complaint or you can send your concerns about that. I personally think that has no business in the place of a scientific study, and that our kids don't need to be seeing that. That is my opinion. Thank you for listening. Anyway, welcome to the show, guys. You can go to my Patreon page to lend support to my show to help me keep the show on the air and to also archive. I've been doing some Heflin stuff today, so I've got some cool, an old article from way back when, and all the photos and different things. It's kind of cool. I've been doing a little work for somebody, and so these aren't the originals, but these, I've got just a ton of them, and so this has been really fun. And thanks to some of your support here when you're doing the super chat stickers and things, that helps me archive, which this is an important body of work. You need to see it. So anyways, I said I would quit talking, and here I am. I need to bring on my guest. So Chris, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be back.
I know, I'm really excited. And you've got a new book out, and I want to just tell everybody a little bit about you. I'm sure most people know who you are, but in case they don't, you've published 9 books, or is this your 10th now?
This is my 10th one that's just
Okay.
out now. Yeah.
Okay. So that in one of your books was in Visitations, Unnatural History, Mysterious Manitoba, co-authored with David Creighton and Brian Fidler, Abductions and Aliens, the Canadian UFO Report, and you were editor of the Swamp Gas Journal, an occasional UFO zine first published in 1978. When you were a part of a Decadent Winnipeg Fandom. So that is so cool. And you were past president of the Winnipeg Science Fiction Society. That must have been a gas, but those were
Yeah.
some fun times there. You are a Canadian science writer and educator with a background in astronomy. And you also have a passion for teaching science concepts to children and adults. You've been doing that since the 1970s, along with studying UFO reports. And I will say that I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the years. And I remember, and I mentioned this on the last show I did with you, but I remember, calling you, and this was back when I was state director for MUFON, and I was kind of nervous to talk to you. And it was really fun. And you were very kind and gave me your opinions. And as somebody who's, was newer in the field at the time, that always meant the world to me to know that somebody like yourself would take a minute and spend time with me. So thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I mean, I've always found you quite refreshing, and certainly I really enjoy some of the things you're saying about ufology and your discussions over the years, and what you're doing right now in preserving UFO history, and carrying to the greater public some of the important topics and the important issues that have to be addressed.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because I just, it's like you've been in this a lot longer than I have, and you can just see some of the dysfunction. And it's so amazing that the same cast of characters keeps inserting the same narrative, and yet a younger generation completely doesn't look at history and say, wait a minute, we debunked this 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's a continual issue that people will be posting some really old cases, and they're saying, wow, this is fantastic, and it's incredible. And I said, well, yeah, except have you read the background story? Have you actually Googled this and looked for some of the other information? Because it's really not as simple as that.
And do you find that people want to listen to you, or are they just so excited in believing a sexy story or something?
Yeah, it actually is very hard to get people to listen to other than sensational stories. And as soon as you interject a little question about, are you sure that's the way the story went, or did you actually read the background, or have you read this other book too? And they'll just say, well, no. In fact, it's quite interesting. Speaking of that, one of the questions on UFO updates that I'm one of the admins for right now on Facebook, and to gain admission to UFO updates, to be allowed to post, one of the questions is, what's the last book you've read on UFOs? And I would have to say that 75 to 80% of the people who want to join so they can post simply say, I don't read books. I just watched a couple of YouTube videos. And that's it.
Oh, Lordy. So you're
Yeah.
like, nope.
No, nope.
So and that brings me to a good question, I think, because a lot of people are looking for information to read. And of course, you've got all of your books, and we're going to talk about your latest contribution to the subject in a little bit. But what are your top 5 books that you would recommend to younger people coming into the subject?
Oh, that's a tough one. That is a real tough one. I mean, I would say if somebody's just starting out, I would go all the way back to Ed Ruppelt's book, Report on UFOs, Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, which is from 1952. And why would you want to read something that old? Well, it gives you the background on what the government had been doing with regard to UFOs. So when you see something on TV now about congressional hearings and pilots seeing UFOs and politicians, well, it goes back to 1952 to really put it in perspective. So that would be certainly one that I would just say, take a look at this. And then if I was to go from there, I would have to go to one of Hynek's books. Speaking of Paul Hynek, and Alan Hynek, his father wrote a number of books. I would have to say either Edge of Reality, or actually the better one would be the Hynek UFO Report, in which after he was out of the military UFO biz, he wrote a book about what he really thought, and he had actually been restrained and constrained while working for Project Blue Book in the Air Force. And he actually, says this is what the case was really about. And this is what really was seen. And this is the evidence that was ignored or glossed over or something like that. So that actually gives you another perspective, again, insight into the government. So there's those two there. And, speaking of military and Air Force, try and find the original Condon report. I know actually a number of organizations have actually digitized the entire thing, and it's enormous. I actually have a copy over here. my side over here. That's the and I'll just show you.
Yeah.
So this was a paperback copy of the book about the Condon report. And, because you would always see dime novels and stuff like that on the book stands, except this one was a little different because when you turned it sideways, it's huge.
Wow.
It, in fact, what's the pagination? This is 960 pages on this right here. And the reason I would say take a look at that is because that was the end of Project Blue Book, and that was the reason why, from 1969 up until fairly recently, the United States Air Force was doing nothing about UFOs. So read that and keep in perspective and read it with a critical eye, because there were books produced after that about the Condon report, which sort of showed its limitations and why they really weren't interested in getting to the bottom of the truth at all. So those are three, and then after that, it's really a dog's breakfast, I suppose, into what to read. But I mean, there's certain authors that I would look for. I would say anything by Jenny Randles,
yes,
is pretty good. I'm looking at my bookshelf is starting to look pretty empty. I'm donating most of my collection to the archives up here in Canada.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So actually, I don't have as many books around right now, but people say take a look at Jacques Vallée's work. I mean, yeah, absolutely. He's gotten into some strange stuff lately. Mind you, he was into some strange stuff in the 90s as well. So what the heck? So take a look at Invisible College and things like that. But I have to say, take a look at some of the skeptics books. I mean, take a look at something by Phil Klass, UFOs Identified. Take a look at Robert Schaefer has a curious book out as well. Of course, Bob goes to UFO conferences. He's one of the few debunkers who actually goes to UFO conferences, and he writes about them and things like that. And he has an interesting perspective. But so I would say read as much as you can. Try to stay away from the real pop ufology stuff, because those are far too easy, and they may not contain 100% verified truth. And it's really hard to find really, really good verified truths these days too.
Right. I mean, it really is. The internet has been wonderful for so many things, and it's been damaging for so many things. And the spread of misinformation can happen so much quicker now than it used to. And so I'm seeing some, comments about class, but I think that, I definitely absolutely agree with you that we should read class. In fact, I've got some series of photographs of Anne Druffel and Phil Klass at conferences, mm-hmm. and have their correspondence. And it's like, I was at a conference, one of the MUFON symposiums, and I've seen, Bob at several conferences, and I really enjoy talking with him. And especially I need to get him back on the show so he can sing some opera for me. Because he loves that. He's got such a great voice. But it's, so it is important to to make sure you're keeping yourself grounded and looking at everything, because the UFO subject is so laden with garbage. I mean, I hate to say that, but you get so much, even at the conference that I was at a couple of weeks ago, it was fascinating to start to hear about the Galactic Federation,
Mhm.
And some of these things. And it's just like, oh, that's, not working for me. I hope it doesn't work for people I know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to tell you, when I'm at UFO conferences, and I don't go to very many, I mean, haven't been to any in 3 years, but when I used to go once in a while, I would sit in on the experiencers sessions and listen to some of their stories. At the same time, I would, listen to the more nuts and bolts things. And it's interesting to get a real broad perspective and try and have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. That's a problem. Um, and to take it all with a grain of salt, but you have to use some critical thinking and apply some common sense to it all too.
You do. And it's funny because I was just thinking about some of the things that I believed in, 10, 15 years ago, when I was, I was a newbie in the subject, and I was going to conferences and seeing specific people talking, and it's like, oh, he's a god. I mean, just like I was a fangirl. And then it's like you watch these people in action, and then you start to question, and maybe not. And then, okay, I've got your number. That's good. And so, that's why I've kind of found, for me, like finding inspirations that are pretty low visibility.
Hmm. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. A lot of people whose names are not familiar to most people, and yet they're probably doing some of the best work. Isaac Coy, for example, is doing an amazing work. Jan Aldrich, Kurt Collins. These are people who are doing some amazing work. They're publishing some great stuff, putting some stuff online, and nobody's heard of them. And it's just too bad. But I was a fanboy back then too. I had the privilege of meeting Alan Hynek quite early in the 70s, and then shortly after that, within another year or so, I met Stan Friedman. And interestingly enough, both of them, not at the same time, but both of them ended up staying over at my home when they came into town. Stan, because he was cheap and wanted to pocket some of the travel money and hotel money. But Alan was very pleasant, and he had the ability to take cat naps. And I remember him. He was over at my place, and he said, "Do you mind if I laid down, on your bed just for like 10 minutes? I just need to recharge." And I said, "Sure." So I went to the bedroom, and you could have timed it with a stopwatch, 10 minutes. And during that time, you could hear something snoring in there. And he came out, and he was fresh as a daisy, and
Wow.
it was really quite remarkable. And I had met Paul, his son, back in, I'm trying to remember what year that was. I guess it was 79 for the eclipse. The Hyneks, Alan and Mimi, and a couple of their kids, Paul and I forget which other one had come, but they all came up to Canada for a solar eclipse. And we all stayed at the same resort. This was February, so it was like 40 below, but it was a beautiful snowy scene, and it was just gorgeous. And I spent some time talking with Alan. I remember I was in his room in the resort, and we were talking UFOs, and all of a sudden we were looking out the window at the snowy landscape. It's beautiful, crystal clear. The snow itself was glistening. There's some trees in the distance. And he just said, Chris, if a UFO came and landed right now outside our window, no one would believe us. Absolutely no one. Because we were ufologists, and why would you believe ufologists? And he just sort of got wistful, and then he turned back to me and he started talking about whatever else we'd been talking about at the time. And he was a very fascinating person. I think that he would be really dismayed at what ufology has become right now, and what's being said on his behalf in some cases. But it's And people are talking about how incredible it is that there's going to be the possibility of congressional hearings. We had this one session, and of course, Alan, was part of the first congressional hearings back in 1968. And people say, "What do you mean congressional hearings about UFOs?" Well, yeah, it happened before, and 2 years after that, the United States government closed Blue Book and shut down all UFO investigations. So hearings don't necessarily mean that there's going to be some developments.
Right, and that's such a great point. I was posting some things that I had from the congressional hearings from '68, on my Twitter feed and things, just to, put that point out. It's like, okay, this isn't, we act like we're reinventing the wheel, and these things happened. And back then, in my opinion, the people that were involved were so much more credible. And
Absolutely.
didn't have as much, I think, going on behind the scenes that potentially could be questionable and politically motivated. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, you had James McDonald, the brilliant scientist who actually challenged Alan Hynek. There's the classic story in Anne's book, Firestorm, yeah, in her book, where he came into Hynek's office and pounded the desk, saying, "What the heck are you doing?" And he was very angry about the way that ufology was starting to take some turns back then. But when you have credible scientists like that talking about what's going on, and now for some reason we're, like you say, we're reinventing the wheel for some reason. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
do you think that there's is it just like a marketing ploy? And what would the motivations be behind some of this? Because I'm looking through some. I've been doing a lot of work about people behind the scenes and their affiliations and things, because I think that's really important to understand a person's perspective and where they are in the business community, where they are in other areas, because that really paints a picture. And then you get them in a group, and they're specifically trying to do things. It's like, what is that about? Is that really truly altruistic, or what is the end game there?
Yeah, I mean, I know that some people had pointed to the Stars Academy, for example, that when it started up, it had so much promise, and then it turned into a money-making scheme or something like that, according to some people. And again, it shows, that we have these things that show promise, and then they seem to either fizzle out or take on dimensions that are less than appealing. Whether the whole thing is a marketing scheme, I mean, there a lot of the same players, like you say, keep showing up in all of these things, and you kind of have to wonder whether it's just a matter of they're scratching each other's backs, and it's an old boys network or something like that's prolonging the whole thing. It's hard to say, and I have complete sympathy for people who are joining the whole UFO scene fairly recently, because they see something on TV and they see the Tic Tac video from the and Nimitz and all that sort of stuff, and they're thinking, "Wow, this is fantastic! I want to find out more about this." In fact, up here in Canada, there's some politicians who are really fired up about UFOs now, and one just admits that he was sort of semi-interested in the subject, and then he saw some of these videos and saw the 60-minute segments, and he says, "Oh well, this is fantastic. We must get to the bottom of this, because this is something that my constituents have to learn more about." And when I sat down with some of them, I sort of said, "Well, that's true, but you have to put in perspective, and you have to realize some of the background for some of this stuff." But I sympathize, because it seems so amazing, and as I said, when I was a fanboy and everything back then, ufology looked so fantastic. This is before the internet. It was what you got in the National Enquirer, what you got on occasional news blurbs, and great UFO magazines back then. So that's what you're getting the information from, and that's why in 1989 I got together with my Canadian UFO colleagues, and I said, I want to find out exactly what's going on with UFOs in Canada, in one country. Forget about what's happening anywhere else in the world, in the United States. At least if we can get an idea in one country what's going on, how many reports are in a year, what's the distribution like, what are the characteristics, how many people see it, then we can, make some inroads at all. So that was more than 30 years ago. And since then, we've amassed something like 23 to 25,000 separate UFO reports in Canada,
Wow.
just in Canada, all in a database, and we're doing the analyses. The 2021 edition just came out about a month ago or so. There were about 700 UFO cases in Canada in that 1 year. And that's the raw data. That's the basis for all the wild speculation about what the propulsion is, whether the aliens are mantises or the little gray guys, or what planet they're from, and what the metamaterials are made of. The reports are the fundamental basis of what this is all about. And if you don't look at the cases themselves and analyze and take a good look at what's going on, then the rest is just sheer speculation. You're really just waving your arms madly and rising off the ground.
Ooh, that sounds kind of exciting. So, when the data is coming in, when you're looking at the case reports, like where specifically are you getting that from?
We get them from as much of a cross section of the population as possible. We get them from some UFO groups, certainly Peter Davenport's New Fork, MUFON. We get them from, in Canada, there's a couple of groups in Quebec. There's other groups in Canada, of course, UFO BC, for example, and things like that. But then reports come directly to us, to Canadian UFO Survey. Reports come directly to me. They come directly to they come on to updates. Sometimes they go into, there's a number of Facebook groups in Canada where people are actually reporting UFOs and posting photos and videos and whatnot. We've got reports on Twitter. They come in on Instagram, and I think we've got one on TikTok, but I have to go take a look. So they're coming in through social media and all these sources. We also get them from the Canadian government, from Transport Canada, and from time to time from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Air Force, the Canadian Forces, and so we get as much of a cross section as possible, so we know what people are seeing and what's being reported. And it's quite an interesting database. In fact, in Canada, we've been able to obtain this type of mass data. As I mentioned, we've been doing it since the late 1980s. And it sort of fills in the gaps, because once Blue Book fizzled out in 1969 into 1970, we really had no information on what the United States government, certainly the Air Force, and certainly not the Navy, were doing with regard to UFOs, whether military pilots were seeing anything, whether the public was sending stuff somewhere, and who knows where that was going. And we only had a final, a little bit of a nibble on that fairly recently, with the whole Leslie Keane, Pentagon, all that sort of stuff, when we found out that there was a project between 2007 and 2012, and maybe something now, we don't know after that. But between 2007 and 1970, going back, that's a pretty good gap where we didn't really have any information. In Canada, we've actually had continual access to government reports, and up until this year, where we've been getting information on what pilots have been seeing, what has been reported to the military, and some of those cases are actually from American pilots too. So we're getting some information, allowing some fill-in and allowing some speculation. So we're hoping that this will lead to a little more rigorous analysis of what's going on with regard to ufology.
Wow, that's quite a pool that you're collecting data from.
Mhm.
And I have to ask you before I ask, trust no one, thank you for the donation, and I will ask your question, but I wanted to, you hear so many people say that the quality of information coming into specific databases, and then you get the investigator investigating it, and it's kind of tainting the information. Are you looking at the information? I mean, how do you look at that, and especially across all those platforms, you're
Mhm.
getting probably different bits and pieces of reports. How do you narrow that down and kind of throw out the good with the bad?
Yeah, that's a real problem. And because what we're doing, we don't actually investigate UFOs. In fact, that's one big fallacy in regard to ufology. We don't investigate UFOs. The UFOs are long gone. What we're investigating are the reports and the eyewitness testimony of what was seen. And UFO report investigation is kind of a lost art. I know that MUFON has its STAR team and organizations like that train people in investigations and so forth, but very little, even on MUFON's side, gets investigated. Most UFO reports are, a letter or an email or a post from somebody who says, "I saw this on such and such a night. It did this. Uh, Here's sort of a blurry photograph or a video," and that's it. And to follow that up, sometimes it requires many hours of investigation. Sometimes it's pretty simple, and you can just by email find out that the person was actually looking at Starlink satellites and things like that. But by and large, UFO investigation is very tough, and I really sympathize with Avi Loeb in that he's not interested in eyewitness human observations of UFOs because it's not instrumented. You don't actually have data that can be replayed and really analyzed and examined. They really want to get these observation platforms and radar systems and whatnot all set up and then work to analyze that. That makes perfect sense, except that eyewitness testimony can convict you of a criminal offense in a court of law. Eyewitness testimony of things like Sputnik. When Sputnik went up in the 50s, the American government actually enlisted the aid of Skywatch observers to help observe what was going on in the sky, so that they could track Sputnik and then later satellites, so that we could find out what was going on. And then even more recently, the stealth bomber, when it was under development, plane spotting was a really big thing, and aircraft observers were able to make detailed observations of not only whatever was flying in the sky, but the contrails, that if they had little bursts and things like that, you could infer from that what engines were involved and so on and so forth. So personal observations, eyewitness observations, can really supplement a lot of the instrumented observations. I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I'm hoping that's not what's going to happen, because there's a lot of value in the eyewitness observations themselves.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you. And I have to ask, trust no one, thank you again for your donation. And he wants me to ask if he or she, do you buy any of the basic Elizondo story?
Boy, that's a big question.
Yes, it is.
um, I mean, I know that speaking of Avi Loeb, I mean, he's now been taken under Avi Loeb's wing, or the other way around. I'm not sure. So there seems to be a merging of some of these. Here in Canada, I mentioned the politician who went public fairly recently about wanting the Canadian government to come a little more transparent on with regard to UFOs and investigations, and in parallel what's going on in the States. And he actually had reached out to me and asked me to brief him about UFOs. So I briefed this particular politician, but he also reached out to Louis Elizondo and Robert Powell and a few others. And when the news hit that this politician had gone public about his interest in UFOs, he mentioned Louis Elizondo, Robert Powell, and Hal Puthoff and a few others, not mentioning me. Which is quite interesting, because Louis Elizondo is sort of the guy right now that everybody turns to, which is curious, because his early comments in media suggested he wasn't thoroughly versed in the UFO field and had some stumbles there. But there's no question that he'd been involved in something. And I guess it's important to understand that he was working in counterintelligence, and somebody who comes from an intelligence background um, who is now involved in investigations into possible security breaches, and what people are actually seeing and experiencing. Um, I've heard the suggestion that maybe he's just sort of a wild card or something like that. There's some suggestion he had been involved in remote viewing, one of the men who stared at goats and so forth. Um, but I've never met him. I've never talked with him. I've seen him speak a few times. He certainly is very persuasive. I know he's getting a lot of airtime right now. Do I buy any of the story? I suspect, where there's fire, there's some smoke, at the very least. But I don't know him enough to comment on it. I've heard all the comments for and against, but it's one of those, I don't know.
Good answer. No, it's when I come across, I know people think I'm an Elizondo hater and different things, and I've definitely spoken out about some of my questions with regard to all of this, because I think there's some interesting dynamics at play that just kind of leave me questioning. And after everything that I've learned about the Skinwalker gang, I think it's a little right. So it's
Well,
okay.
yeah, I think that's right. I think you have to take this into account. You have to be fairly discerning, and don't accept anything at face value. And I think a lot of people are doing that. UFO Twitter is full of that, where people are just going rabid about as soon as someone questions anything that seems to be canon, they're thrown to the wolves. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, that I always, just kind of wonder. I was talking to Barry Greenwood, I think last night, about this. It's just like, where did that even come from? Who started that? What was the, because it just seems like a perfect place to go in and, monitor everybody's reactions to things. And I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. But I have to ask you, because Jim is up late, or it's early in the morning over where he is, and he wants to know if you ever met Mr. Jean Duplantier.
Jean Duplantier? Yes. I did meet Jean Duplantier several times. For those who don't know, Jean Duplantier was, well, how do you describe him? He was ran a one-man publishing house of UFO magazine publications and books. He republished a lot of really obscure publications. He was based out of Toronto, actually a little town north of Toronto. And he very kindly, we exchanged things. I used to publish the Swampcast Journal, as you mentioned. So I had sent him copies of my stuff, and he would send me copies of his mags and things like that. He published one publication. I think you have it, called Who's Who, You Folk, or something like that. Great guy. He was very dedicated, and as a matter of fact, he was still alive, I'm saying, before the pandemic. I don't know if he made it through. He was quite elderly.
No, Jim was just saying, the fellow that asked the question, he was just saying that he died at the age of 94 on December 17th, 2019. Yeah,
that's about right. Yeah, very sad to see. I visited him in his home a couple of times, and really very knowledgeable, very knowledgeable. It was a tragic loss when he passed away, but he was great. Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. Thank you for answering that. And then thank you, Trust No One, again for the super sticker. Trust No One would like to know when a FOIA is submitted in Canada, does the name Chris Rutkowski appear on so many of them? And how many checklists like CL213 are you aware of?
Well, a couple of things. Well, first of all, it's not an FOIA in Canada. That's strictly American. In Canada, there are ATIs, access to information, and they're slightly different. They're under completely different regulations, and not quite as quite broad. I file them all the time, by the way, because I certainly get some access other ways, but there's stuff that I don't know myself, and so I actually filed those. I filed some just last week. And why does my name show up? Well, it shows up because since let's see, since the year 2000, or is it 1999? I think 1999. I began receiving copies of UFO reports sent through the Ministry of Transport, Transport Canada, and National Defense regarding UFOs. And I've been collecting this material and publishing it online sometimes. Certainly have posted some documents on my blog. I've been using the cases in my Canadian UFO survey, so they're included in that sort of stuff. And the reason that happened is because the Canadian government has been involved in UFO investigation all along. It partnered with the United States a number of times. In the 1960s, up until that time, the Royal Canadian Air Force was investigating UFOs and dealing with them parallel to the United States Air Force. But to them, after the United States Air Force said there was no defense issue, that didn't pose a threat and all this sort of stuff, they wanted to sort of move away from the UFO thing. And they convinced the National Research Council of Canada, which is the Canadian equivalent of the Smithsonian, to investigate UFOs and be the body responsible for dealing with UFOs. And they were looking at it from a scientific perspective. They thought that if people had a better understanding of, atmosphere illusions and what satellites were up there and so forth, that everybody would be much better for it. But to investigate, the reasoning was some of the lights in the sky that people were seeing were shooting stars, meteors, and sometimes a meteor is large enough that it falls to the earth and found as a meteorite. And there was a division within the National Research Council called the Meteoric Investigation Bureau. And there's some scientists who were studying meteorites because they're very valuable for understanding of the universe. And so they got the Royal Canadian Mounted Police all across the country, because there's detachments and offices in pretty well every town and city, to investigate UFO reports, because if some of them turn out to be meteors, they might be meteorites, and that would be valuable for science. And that actually happened a couple of times where a lot of people saw meteors in the sky. They were able to find the meteorite on the ground and give it to the National Research Council. Except that when the meteoritic division sort of slowed down, some of the scientists actually passed away. They didn't have any reason to keep it going, and they wanted to get out of the UFO biz. And I had traveled to visit the National Research Council and Archives of Canada many times. And in the National Research Council office in Ottawa, there was something called the non-meteoric sightings file, which is where they threw everything that wasn't a meteor. And that had, sightings of disc-shaped objects at close range and things that pilots were seeing, things that they weren't interested in. So, but they wanted to get out of this, and it was actually a budget line in the government budget, UFO office. And they didn't want that anymore. So I was having lunch with one of the scientists in Ottawa, and he said, we really don't want to do this anymore. And I said, well, you can always have the reports come to me. And he said, oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, thanks for the idea. And it was like 5 or 6 or 7 years later that I got a phone call from a military officer at one of the forces bases saying, are you the guy we're supposed to be sending the UFO reports to? And I said, oh, yeah, sure. Yep, that's me. All right. And then I started getting the reports. And I, as I say, I started analyzing and including them regularly with all the other reports that I was getting. And that's how I, and it said the reports themselves, when they were recorded at the military bases, they actually had forms that said UFO report on them, by the way. And I've shown some of these at conferences and some of my talks. It says UFO report, date, time, location, what was seen. And at the bottom, it says send to Chris Rutkowski. And that's what that note was, CL 2013 or something like that. It's just a procedural designation to send whatever. And so because my name is actually on the sheet, when you filed a request, you would get the report, and then my name would be on it. Okay. So that's how that ended up.
How fascinating. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I have to ask you, do you know, when you look at things going on where you are, and then you look at things going on in the United States, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, being here, I see such a convoluted circus sideshow everywhere. There's so much confusion and so much, I mean, it's just not, it's not like it is over in Europe, which I think it's a little more streamlined, and we don't have as much nonsense. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I mean, what are your thoughts on American ufology?
Well, I'd have to swear for that, and this is a family show, so yeah, I would have to say that. I mean, American ufology is very broad. There's a lot of divisions, a lot of sects, a lot of factions. And I'm not even sure I would delineate it strictly as American, because I mean, there's some really wild stuff going on in England and Spain and Australia and places like that. So I wouldn't necessarily do that, but I have to say that certainly American ufology drives a lot of what we're seeing, and it does seem that it's more interested in, we talked about this earlier, sensational stuff. And they're not necessarily interested, or a lot of people are necessarily interested in the hardcore facts, that it's sufficient to listen to a story, and why should we question stories? When you go to a UFO conference, there's very little. You had this experience when you're at the Skinwalker thing. There's a lot of stuff going on with consciousness and portals and crystals and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of the actual UFO reports and then the factual data, there's very little of that going on. And I'd have to say it's highly speculative, highly energized, and there's a lot of old white guys like me who are driving the ufology right now. I'm really glad that you're here, because you're clearly a different and a fresh voice and a different perspective on looking at things.
Well, thank you. It's been a fun ride. No, I mean, but it is.
Keep telling yourself that.
I will, and getting electric shock therapy at the same time, and it'll be good. But I mean, it has been interesting, and I do. Like, you mentioned Jenny Randles. I mean, there's so many incredible people in the subject, and it would be so fun to get, new people that have the integrity and desire to really look at the history, and then that have, kind of the wherewithal that they can say, wait a minute, this isn't what I'm thinking. And I'm just because somebody is a billionaire allegedly and is a super nice guy, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of believing everything he's saying just because he responded to me on Twitter, and I think we see that a lot now, obviously, specifically with a certain place, what we're talking about, because I always talk about it. But, so there's so many games at hand, and it's like we need people who can see through that. And that's why sharing my story of stupidity, over the years, my little pitfalls and adventures and, things with the Roswell mummy and, oh, my Lord Mary. I mean, everything. It's just
I've been impressed recently, for example, by David Marler and his attempt, speaking of Barry Greenwood, to preserve a lot of ufological stuff. And he's a relative young feller. There's a few others out there who are quite interesting, doing some things. Paul Kingsbury, who's a Canadian, but he's been on some shows and involved in a lot of ways right now. He's a geographer who studies human geography, and he's lectures in Canada quite a bit, and he's an academic who's interested in ufology. I think he might even be part of Avi Loeb's coterie right now too. And then some other people who are sort of up and coming. There's a fellow named Jan Vadnais in Quebec who, again, I can guarantee nobody here who's listening has ever heard
Right.
of this, but there's a Canadian Scientific Society on ufology, which has just been formed this year. They're going to be publishing a journal and having some conferences. It's all behind the scenes, and mostly scientists are involved, but it's not just Canadian. There's scientists involved from Europe as well. And about half of them are French, and half of them are English speaking. And the goal is to have a scientific discussion and a scientific peer-reviewed journal published to bring to the scientific community what's really going on with regard to UFOs. And the guy behind it is this fellow named Jan Vadnais in Quebec. So there's some really interesting developments that people you won't know about, because it's not the type of stuff that's getting all the sensational attention. But there is, in fact, if anything, this is the real invisible college that Jacques Vallée wrote about, where there are people who are working. In fact, there's some discussion about how come science isn't interested in UFOs. One of the things I did last year when that discussion arose was I put together a list of peer-reviewed scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals all about UFOs. And I put it up on my blog, and the list is several hundred items long in journals, and the science has been interested in ufology all along. But again, you would probably never have come across them, because it's not the type of thing that is, waving madly in front of your face.
And absolutely, there are so many things going on. Thank goodness behind the scenes. What do you think about the Galileo project and them bringing on Nick Pope and other people that have had some interesting have interesting backgrounds?
Well, as I mentioned, Avi Loeb, it's curious. I understand, as I mentioned, why they're only interested in instrumented observations, because eyewitness observations are, a problem. There's no question of that. I'm also a little puzzled because the Galileo Project committee reached out to me about a month and a half to 2 months ago, wanting to know if I would be interested in joining them. And then I never heard from them again. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing that they're trying to do. I don't buy the Oumuamua or whatever it is being an alien spaceship. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it's just a chunk, a shard of something, interstellar matter going through space. But Avi had some good points about the fact that we shouldn't automatically reject things. My background is in astronomy. I've gone to many astronomy conferences. I was actually president of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada's Winnipeg chapter for a number of years.
Wow.
And there were astronomers who wouldn't give me the time of day because they knew I was interested in UFOs. Fortunately, they're not all like that, and I was on good terms and worked closely with a number of other astronomers. But even within the Astronomical Society, there was a taboo that they simply said UFOs will never be discussed or published about in their journals. And I think Avi Loeb is a person who's trying to change all that, because while the probability of UFOs being alien spaceships is very, very low, the probability of extraterrestrial life is very, very high. And given that our sun is an average star, and there's stars much younger and stars much older, that there's probably a star not that far away from our sun, which is a little bit older. And if it's a little bit older, any planet that formed around it might have had a head start in terms of evolutionary biology. And if that head start was not just 100 years, but 1,000 years or 10,000 or 100,000 years, if a civilization similar to ours might have figured out a way to travel between the stars, not by breaking the laws of physics, but by bending them perhaps, or using them in ways that we can't imagine. And so we might not even recognize extraterrestrial life if it was to come to Earth. It may be completely different in any shape or size or form. So it's a possibility, but there's nothing. I mentioned 23 to 25,000 UFO reports in Canada over the past 30 years or so. I'd have to say that not a single one of those automatically seems to have been an alien spacecraft. A lot are unexplained. I would say a few hundred of those are still unexplained, but they don't automatically say these are the alien spacecrafts. And yet, I think it's a worthwhile study because if it happens, it will change so much in terms of our knowledge and understanding of our place in the universe.
Absolutely, and that's why I think all of us love it and are fascinated by it, even as frustrating as it can be. It's which it really is. But I mean, do you think that why was the ETH inserted into the narrative? Do you think that there was something strategic about that, or was that a genuine move?
You mean recently in like the Project Galileo? Pardon me?
Well, I mean, decades ago, back when we first heard about, back in the 50s, 40s, late 40s, 50s.
Well, of course, the driving force in the 50s was actually the Cold War. And everybody was very concerned about the Russians. Funny how that happens again and again. But everybody was very concerned that the Russians had somehow beaten the United States in terms of whatever it was, and originally first satellites, and then in terms of other types of technology, and that's why we had the moon race. Then when it became pretty obvious through intelligence that it wasn't the Russians and wasn't at that time China and it wasn't anybody else, and that came about at the same time as science fiction was really, we were past the golden age, but this began to be the era of Forbidden Planet and Star Trek and things like that, where the assumption was that there is life in the universe, and it would be fascinating if they were to come here. And if they were to come here, they'd have to be more advanced than we are. And that in itself is a little bit scary from a military perspective. So I think the ETH was introduced because of the speculation on we didn't know enough. If we don't know what's out there, and we don't know what some of these UFOs are, and from the descriptions of some of the cases, they seem completely alien, then that must be what they are. So I think that's how the ETH got introduced. And of course, it was introduced long before flying saucers. On my bookshelf here, I still think I have a copy of The Green Man by Howard Sherman, which was published in 1956, I think. And it involved an alien that came to Earth in a egg-shaped or tic-tac-shaped object, and he had a ray gun that stopped car engines, and had all the stuff that was starting to happen in the 1950s but this was long before flying saucers were starting to do that. So I mean, it certainly predated it, and it wasn't a big step to go from that to that.
Dang, and I wish I was just looking at that the other day, because I find some of the images in that book, or I mean, it was just like, I mean, here you've got all these, this person coming out, you've got all these people kind of doing a salute, and people on the ground. It was just like, what is going? I mean, it was very, very curious to see.
I'm going to turn my back for a second.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain I actually have Howard Sherman's book, like literally here somewhere.
I do. Yep.
Oh well, you've got it. Okay.
No. Keep talking. I'm going to knock my whole bookshelf off.
Oh yeah.
This could be exciting.
It's a Quattro-sized orange thing. That's it. That's the one I have. Yeah, I've got that one.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Got to thumb through this. I mean, it's just so interesting to look at all of these things. And here, again, just one of the pictures of.
Oh yeah, some great stuff from the pulps. Well, I'll read through that, and I'll pull out my my other worlds.
Oh yeah.
Here's other worlds from what year is that? That is 1952. Other worlds and the real flying saucers. There's a little circle down there.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and other worlds, of course, was a pulp that was publishing science fiction, and because they started publishing the Raymond Palmer stuff about Darrows and subterranean aliens and so forth, um, they they changed the name from Other Worlds to Other Worlds, Flying Saucers from Other Worlds, and then eventually Flying Saucers by itself, which became Flying Saucers magazine, which persisted until well into the 70s as little digest things, and that became some other UFO, and a lot of people had those.
Yeah.
And of course, the publisher Ray Palmer co-wrote the book with Adamski on some of that stuff. So there's a real tie-in there.
Dang, I've just got and I've got like just this little display, and then all of my books are back there. But it's just, and my magazines and things, and I love looking at those pulp covers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were just in Fate magazine back in the late 40s and 50s, and oh my Lord.
Yeah, where's the other? I think I had another one that was kind of cool here too. Oh, I have a Fate here. There's a Fate. That's you can see the flying saucers on it. So yeah,
cool.
All that stuff. Yeah, but I'm donating most of this stuff to the archives. So.
Well, that's cool. So tell us a little bit about you donating them to the archives and how accessible that's going to be to people, what the process is like. Because I know, here in the States, each library has a different policy on things. And I know that Jen Aldrich was just over, he was at Rice University, and they were very specific about how much time you could have in there and things, and same with the University of Utah. So how does that work in your case?
Well, actually, there's a lot of archives. I mean, Grant Cameron, for example, he used to spend a lot of time retrieving documents from presidential libraries. And he's gotten into some really wiggy stuff now, but when he was doing that type of stuff, he was doing some very valuable research and getting some great documents. So presidential libraries were always a good source. You've probably heard about John Greenwald's FOIA requests, and he's what 13,000 or 15,000 pages of documents in the Obama Library on UFOs, that type of thing. So that type of stuff is always occurring. A lot of libraries themselves have collections from other ufologists. In Canada, there are already a few that had previously existed. There's a fellow named Arthur Bray, whose collection was mostly from the 50s and 60s, but he kept on until the 90s or so. And he donated most of his collection to the University of Ottawa. And then, of course, when Stan Friedman passed away, the family donated pretty well everything in his collection to the province of New Brunswick archives. And when they gave a presentation about that, I was invited to speak with them on that. They say there's so much material, it's going to take 15 years even just to catalog what's in there, let alone release it. I was one of the few who had a chance to see Stan's stuff before it got donated. I visited him in his home, and there's a photo that's circulating around of Stan sitting amongst this big mass of paper. It was just quite amazing. So there's a lot of material there. It's going to take some time. And then with my previous book, which is When They Appeared, which is the story of the Falcon Lake case up here in Canada, when that was released, I was actually invited by the university up here in Manitoba to give a little talk about it. And they were curious about what I was going to do with my files and the collection of the material that I based the book on. And I hadn't really thought about that. They said, well, had you considered donating it to the university archives and, preserve it for other people to do research on? I thought, well, that'd be a great idea. So I agreed to that. And I they said, well, what about all your other material? And I said, well, I have, several thousand books and zines and papers and even just the UFO files themselves. I mentioned 23 to 25,000 from the past 30 years. Well, I also have cases going back much further than that, including government documents. So there's a lot of material there. So they said, yeah, by all means, we'd love to have that. So back in 2017, we began the process of donating most of this material to them. The pandemic threw a big wrench into things, so we had to stop donating. In fact, we've just started. You can't see that just in front of me in my office. There's 10 Tupperware bins full of books and documents that are ready to go. They have about a quarter of my collection right now.
Wow. Is your wife going to be happy?
Very happy. Very happy. Yeah, absolutely. But in fact, all my UFO reports, all the UFO reports from the past decades are already transferred to the University of Manitoba. And they're going to be slowly digitizing them. They actually set up a crowdfunding campaign to fund the digitizing of this. And it was tremendously successful. A number of people, I think Barry and Jan also donated to it to try and get this all digitized. It's going to take forever. David Marler, he's very quick at it, and they spend about 3 or 4 months taking staples out and setting up the files and stuff, and then they just zap them and then scan them digitally, and it's very, very quick. The archives is a little bit slower than that, and it's going to take some time. I mentioned Stan Friedman's is going to take 15 years just to catalog. Mine will take some time to actually digitize and scan, but I've gone in there to scan, and the files are open to the public to examine, except for one section of the Falcon Lake files, because I'm still working on something in terms of investigating some of that. But the bulk of the files are available in paper copy for people to look at if they want to come. But I'm slowly digitizing them, and they're slowly digitizing them.
How wonderful! That's great. That is so good to know, and it is interesting to know, Dave Marler and Barry and Jan, and have conversations about, how to. Where's the best place for things to go? How will people have access to it? Now with gas prices so high and things, it makes travel much more difficult and things. And so it is nice to have the potential that it could be
and the Falcon
online.
Lake and the Falcon Lake case is really great because it's, speaking of an industry, there's Falcon Lake beer here in Canada that you
How
can
is
get
that?
with
Is it
the flying
good?
saucer on it. There's in fact, the government of Canada recognized the case by striking a coin in circulation to commemorate it. In fact, I'm going out to the Falcon Lake site. I'm probably going to be going out this weekend sometime, just myself. But the following week, I'm taking a tour in from Atlas Obscura on a Fortean tour of Manitoba. So,
oh, how cool is that?
yeah.
Where can people go to sign up for that?
But it's too late now for Atlas
Okay.
Obscura. But if you come up to Manitoba, despite the gas prices or whatever, Falcon Lake's kind of interesting because the site has been positively identified, and it's easy. It's not easy to visit. It's a 45-minute horseback ride each way to get into the site.
Ooh.
So it's a lot of fun. It's really cool terrain. The horses actually have to climb a bit of a cliff, which is, you really have to hold on tight.
Oh, mother of hellfire and damnation.
Yeah. So there's things like that, but it's there's stuff all over the place. And I was just speaking to somebody the other day about there's a UFO landing pad in Alberta, which was erected in 1967. And the UFOs have not landed on it, unfortunately. They haven't taken us up on the offer. But the Center for UFO Studies traveling exhibit, which was run by John Timmerman, it was permanently installed at that site in Alberta. So for vacation plans, there's lots of places to go. Shag Harbor, I have to mention, too.
Okay, I need to come up there and nerd out.
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
On a UFO tour. That would be such a change of scenery from Skinwalker Ranch and stuff here. It would just be that would be fun. That sounds great. But I've been thinking about doing, I would love to do some tours here in Utah, because there's so many
Cool.
interesting cases that people don't even know about. I think it's very interesting with relation to Utah. There aren't a lot of really well-known cases.
Hmm.
You've got Skinwalker Ranch, you've got Tremont, and you've got
Tremont, yeah, yeah.
but other than that, a lot of that is, even when I was state director for Utah MUFON, you couldn't really find a lot of things on Utah, and I had to wonder if that's because we have such a large concentration of defense and aerospace contractors here, that
Hmm.
there would be a need to potentially keep some of
Yeah.
that out of the public domain.
And yet, if you look onto Peter Davenport's Newfork site, you look up Utah, and there's lots of cases from Utah. So is it a matter of that these people haven't really investigated a lot of them, or they're not really well known, and maybe there's some real gems in there that you just have to take a second look at.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had Barry at one point. He's what a wonderful person he is to archive everything, and he has all the news clippings. And so he sent me everything from Utah, and it was, he remarked as well. It's like there just isn't, for Utah, there isn't as much as you would see in any other state.
Really, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Very interesting.
yeah. Those are
Yeah.
two. So I don't know. Clearly, we are a UFO hotspot, though. Those, beam me up to the mothership, and
Yeah.
hopefully that hairy creature will step out of the portal and take me away.
Yeah.
Or not. Just kidding.
So I want to touch on this little guy here.
Yes.
So this is my latest book, and even though I'm on UFOs classified, this is declassified. So I'm declassifying your show here.
Well, thank you.
What this book is, as I mentioned, the National Research Council of Canada was looking into UFOs from about 1967-ish, a little bit before that, 66 maybe, up until 1995. And the Libraries and Archives Canada was the repository in Ottawa of all the National Research Council files every year. And what happened is that every year, the non-meteoric UFO reports that they weren't interested in went into this file drawer. And at the end of the year, that file drawer was transferred to the archives, and it was just, shelved and be done with. And so the public could go in and take a look at it any time. And I went to Ottawa many times and went through the archives and looked at the cases. In about 2005, 6, 7, something like that, Libraries and Archives Canada digitized parts of various collections. And because of the interest in UFOs, they digitized the UFO collections. So there's something about 9,000 separate documents of cases from the National Research Council and Royal Canadian Air Force files that were made available online. And a lot of people have downloaded the whole lot. Isaac Coy has a set. A few other places have sets, but because there's so much, it's hard to go through them. And because it's not all nicely chronological ordered, you have to go through several sections. So I went through them and I thought, I'm going to find out all the cases that there are, and I want to find out what's the distribution. So I did it kind of similar to what the Canadian survey is like. But are there cases in there that deserve more attention? And what was actually done with them? Were there cases that were well investigated by the Air Force and by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police? And oddly enough, I found some real gems in there. So this book goes through some of the more interesting cases that deserve attention and should have deserved more attention, and I present them for the reader to take a look. And they range from Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers who had their UFO flying over their cars at close range. Some came over trains, the train engineers had seen things. Many pilot sightings, many pilot sightings. You might remember the Coyne helicopter case where the plane was levitated. There's a case like that in Canada where a small plane was levitated apparently by a UFO. There's some fascinating cases in there. close encounters, and I go into detail on some of the Falcon Lake. Even though the Falcon Lake case I did a whole book on, there's still some other things I needed to talk about. Shag Harbor's in there, the thing that crashed off the coast of Nova Scotia. And one thing I'd like to talk about a little bit more is in ufology, American ufology, you've probably heard of the Robertson Committee. Mm-hmm. And it was very cynical and, killed ufology in so many ways. In Canada, there's something called the Robertson Briefing. Now, quite recently in Canada, there was attention drawn to the fact that in 2021, somebody filed an access to information request and found out that the Minister of National Defense of Canada, so imagine the Secretary of Defense in the United States, there was a new one, previous person had left, the new one came into power, and he wanted a briefing on UFOs, what Canada has been doing on UFOs over the past little while. And this is because of what was going on in the United States with all the attention for the Tic Tacs and the Nimitz and so forth. So they prepared a briefing for him. Well, because I had been receiving cases and reports from National Defense and the RCMP and so forth, Transport Canada, they reached out to me for material to give to the minister for part of the briefing. So put that in perspective, imagine if somebody asked you, Erica, we want to brief the Secretary of Defense on UFOs. Do you have anything that you could give us? And
that's amazing.
So I was doing my civic duty or
exactly.
national duty or something. So I gave the material, a number of things, and I forgot it. I figured I'd never hear anything about it. And then just this year, somebody had filed an access to information request about what the Minister of Defense knew, and they found out there was this briefing. They filed for the briefing. They were denied the briefing, but they got the slides, the PowerPoint that was part of the briefing. And sure enough, it mentions Chris Rutkowski has been doing the research for Canada, and we've been giving our reports to him, and he's been researching and analyzing the data. And they actually had a photo of Chris Rutkowski on the PowerPoint slide. So the Minister of Defense knew who I am when he was looking at the material. And so we know that was going on in Canada. Well, in 1967, the outgoing Minister of Defense back then, he'd been slightly interested in UFOs. Maybe you've heard of him, Paul Hellyer.
Oh, yes.
The new one was coming in, and he needed to be briefed on UFOs. His name was Leo Cadieux. And Paul Hellyer, by the way, when he was in office, he said he was not interested in UFOs whatsoever. Didn't see anything cross his desk. It was all nonsense, so forget about it. But this Leo Cadieux wanted to know what was going on. So a briefing was prepared, and in these documents, which are part of the archives in Ottawa, was a 28-page document called the Robertson Briefing. And whereas recently we don't have the briefing, but we have the PowerPoint slides, we don't have the slides for what was shown in 1967, but we have the actual briefing. And it's 28 pages long, and I wanted the readers of the book to appreciate it, and I've got the publisher to reproduce all 28 pages in the book so you see what was talked about. And one of the things that's talked about are, how many UFO reports they had, how many could be explained, how many were interesting, how many were not interesting, what the Americans are doing, what other countries are doing. And by the way, these are the top 6 cases which we can't explain. So there were 6 cases detailed in this report that were considered mysterious. And there's actually a statement in there that says the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Royal Canadian Air Force cannot explain these cases. That was 1967, where the government of Canada, the military departments, could not explain 6 cases that were well documented, and some of them were instrumental observations. One was the Falcon Lake case. One was Shag Harbor. One involved something that was seen over a lake and appeared to damage some trees. There were 2 radar cases of objects that were observed on radar that were apparently not considered malfunctions in any way. And one was, of all things, crop circles.
Wow.
And in 1967, so this is long before Doug and Dave did anything in England. And what's curious is that these crop circles were investigated by the Royal Canadian Air Force. There's actually a document, a report that was generated, even though no UFO was seen. These rings were found in a field. There's actually photos that accompanied the report, and the report generated by the Royal Canadian Air Force is available, and it talks about landing rings caused by UFOs, even though nobody saw any UFOs. Now, why that was, I don't know, but there was radiation, so that they tested for radiation because there was radiation found at the Falcon Lake case. But what's curious about this is that one of the documents talks about a ministerial inquiry into these rings found in this field that were supposedly caused by UFOs. And at the time of that case, Paul Hellyer was the minister. So he actually ordered a ministerial inquiry at the top level of the Canadian military to investigate these rings that would eventually be called flying saucers in another decade or two. And yet Paul Hellyer never talked about this case at all when he was talking about UFOs.
That's curious.
Yes, It is, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is. And I have to, just throw in there, because I know that Jacques Vallée has said over the years that he felt crop circles were just some sort of weapons testing, laser tests. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we actually caught a number of people who had made some of the ones up here in Canada. And I have to actually apologize, because I'm responsible for the crop circles coming to North America. Oh, and how that happened was that when things started happening in England, I was interviewed by a local TV station, and I was asked about what I thought of crop circles, because in England there was some assumption already that they were being caused by UFOs. And but local interest, they said, in Canada, what's your opinion of what's going on in England? And I said, well, I would find it hard to believe that aliens had chosen England to send their messages, with curlicues and whatever in British fields, when up here in Canada, in a breadbasket area where there's miles and miles and miles of wheat, that we don't have crop circles up here. So that interview was aired. The next morning, crop circles were found here in Canada, which then eventually spread into the United States. And so what I think happened is that the aliens had been watching me on television and realized that, of course, we had more crops up here in Canada, so they made the crop circles, and that's how they came to North America.
You're good that way. That's good. Thanks for sharing the love. Yeah. That was, it's interesting. I remember back, oh my gosh, was this maybe 6 or 7 years ago? I went over to England, and there was a crop circle that had appeared, and it was, oh my gosh, Antsy Farms. And I was there with Gary King, and that was there was a big controversy, but I mean, it was so fascinating to go to the crop circle. They had like a little, pay station set up so you could pay, and then go out there and good on them for, just if you're part of your crop is destroyed, whatever, it makes money. But I mean, it was just so funny to watch these people out there, just like, they're just like, oh, looking up and, laying on the ground. I mean, not, who am I kidding? I was laying on the ground too. I've got some photos, I'm telling you, but it was just so funny to, to see people in these places that,
we had that too. I mean, there's a crop formation up here in Canada. I mean, I looked at many of them. We went out to this one, and in Canada, the dollar coin is called the loonie. It has a picture of a loon on it. And there were some enterprising kids who had set up a little booth outside on the edge of the crop circle, and they said, "A loonie, a look," was what the sign said. And it was good for them, great for them, great.
I would love to have that sign.
Yeah.
That would be back on my shelf. And I have to ask you, because Amy was mentioning the little red-eyed creature you've got behind you on the bookshelf.
Oh, that that. Well, this should be familiar to people who are on social media. Come on, this is the Reddit alien,
Ah,
and um, what's the name of him? Do you know the name of him?
no.
Yeah, his name is Snoo, as in
Snow.
what Snoo.
Okay. Okay.
But this is if you go onto the Reddit site, this is the Reddit alien. And I mean, people have given me all sorts of stuff over the years, and for Christmases and birthdays and that type of thing. And I've been collecting, and so I got an actual Reddit alien.
Oh, that's cute. That's cute in some strange way.
As
Okay,
a
you got
matter
it.
of fact, we're live, right? In a few hours, I'm going to be on a television interview talking about the 40th anniversary of ET, which came out June 11th, 1982.
Well, I wasn't alive then, so.
And I have to tell you that E.T. and I have been very close over the years. He came down to spend some time with me.
Oh, he is just so cute in a really disturbing way.
The life-size alien that I got at a science fiction convention.
That's pretty cute. I mean, he's got little man boobies. That's even cuter.
Yes.
I mean, I love like the little trinkets like that
Well, I've got the
get over the years. I mean, yeah, keep showing. I want to see.
Oh yeah, I've got. There's a little. This is an ET figurine set. There's a little teeny tiny Drew Barrymore over here.
Oh,
you
cute.
know, things like that. So oh yeah, I've got all
Idiot.
sorts of stuff, and yeah, and of course you have to have a good alien tankard, to.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
If I've got anything.
Yeah.
I've got the Area 52 shot glass.
Okay.
From,
Yes.
From Dugway Proving Ground.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. You want me to? You really want it? Huh? Okay.
Yep.
Let's see what we got here. Oh, this one. Okay. This is the souvenir ball, baseball from the Las Vegas 51s. And they were the farm team of, I think, the Red Sox, if I'm not mistaken. They originally were the farm team for the Blue Jays, but they're the farm team of the, I think, the Red Sox right now.
That's so cool.
And so I have a souvenir ball from them. So, oh yeah, we've got.
Yeah,
stuff.
keep going.
You want more?
Oh. Yes. I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. I think this is fun.
What else can I do? Well, I mean, I've got more. Oh well, here we are. Oh, now I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. This may work. Oops. Oh no, it won't work. I had a lamp here. Maybe this one will work. Oh yeah, that'll work. Okay. So the Canadian government has issued commemorative coins. This is the actual from the Canadian Mint of UFO events, and this is the one for Falcon Lake.
Oh, that's cool.
And it actually, when black light is shone on it, the UFO actually appears, which you can't really see on this. But anyways, there's 5 so far, and they are the most popular coins that have ever been commemorative coins that have been struck by the Canadian government. They sell out within hours, and the Canadian government has contacted me regularly about designing the coins. There's another one coming out. I can't tell you what it is, but there's another one that's in development right now. It's probably going to come out next year.
How cool! Okay, you've got to let me know because I need to get one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am,
if you look on eBay, they're real silver. They're quite heavy, so I think they're something like $150 or $200 worth of silver.
Wow.
And they're on eBay. They're going for a couple of thousand. So.
Well, Nelson Mandela. Okay, so I've got to show you. Like this is, I don't know. I've got so many. I love being a nerd. Like this is so much fun. So I've got like this. This is from Anne Druffel, but the Fun for UFO research.
Oh,
40 years
nice.
is long enough. Well, I guess we're
Okay.
gonna keep
Nice.
on going with that one. And then I got this. Like this is totally nerdy. When Communion came out,
I have one of
which I
those.
was
Yeah.
like 4 years old then.
Nice. Very, very nice.
It's just, I mean, I know that's so impressive
No,
compared to your stuff.
it's fun to show off. Oh, and I've got I've got this is a figurine from the original Close Encounters.
That's cute.
Yeah, yeah.
Dated him.
Posable, bendable. Oh, and I have to show off this because I'm asked to give presentations in schools, and from time to time, and it's really handy now over Zoom. It works actually much better. But when I go into schools to give presentations to kids about science and astronomy and aliens, sometimes I get visits. I sometimes get visits from people from creatures who really shouldn't be. No.
Oy vey.
Boy, he's always a problem. He's always a problem.
He looks like a problem.
Yeah.
I've often thought, and I've mentioned this on my show, it's like I would love in my mind to have a sock puppet show on ufology. And have like the Jeremy Corbell sock puppet and George Knapp and I mean just in my mind it's really funny and I'll have to do that someday. But
I really enjoyed giving presentations. Like when I teach astronomy to some of the younger grades. We sing silly songs, and I have a hat on with all the planets and things like that. And I pull out the guitar, and it's a lot of fun to get kids motivated in science. And I've written a couple of papers and had them published about one of the ways to get young minds interested in UFOs without even talking about UFOs is to get them interested in the foundations. There's actually a science fair variant called Invent an Alien, where you challenge the kids, and that goes. They can do it from grades 3 and up, I think. Where you say, okay, imagine there's an alien living on Mars. What does it eat? Are there Martian plants or Martian buffaloes or whatever? And how does it get around? And does it have 2 eyes or does it have 4 eyes? Because 4 eyes, you'd be able to see more. And how does it talk? The Martian atmosphere is a little thin. So does it shout? Does it use, telepathy? And you get them to talk about what other alien biology would be like. And that gives you a better understanding of what our biology is like. Why do we have 2 eyes on an extension of our body way up here, when if you're really walking along and you don't want to trip on something, you need the eyes down there? And if our stomach is down there, why does the entry to the stomach come from here? And why is it the same thing we use to speak with? And why do we have 2 ears? Why not, sensors like insects have? And it really is an amazing way to learn about who we are by speculating about what else might be out there. So it's there's some fantastic ways to talk about us by talking about aliens. I lost her. She fell asleep. Hello? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can also see on my bookshelf. Okay, so that was the Reddit alien. You can see there's a model up there. That is a bottle of vodka, of course. And this, of course, is a coin box. No. Yes. If you're interested in learning more about my books, by all means, take a look for me online. I'm on Facebook. I'm on other social media, Instagram, Twitter, and you can look for my blog at uforum.blogspot.com. And I really am puzzled as to what happened to Erica. She was perhaps abducted by aliens? I hope not. I have many documents. You can see most of my bookcases are just full of trinkets now as opposed to the books. I'm really puzzled as to what happened to Erica. It says I'm still live. It says I'm still part of the show. I seem to have a connection. I don't understand. Talk amongst yourself. If you want to go on to Facebook and talk to us on UFO updates, there's some questions to answer before you join. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at Ufology Research on Twitter. Okay, I've tried the broadcast thing on Twitter once or twice. I don't know what happened to Erica. I wonder if I'm still live. I know that some people have been adding questions. Has anybody added a question? Where's my phone? Where's my phone here? I'm going to see if Erica is still alive on Messenger. Oh, power is out. Well, according to Erica, at 8:38, there was a power failure, or it's 6:38, I guess. And so she's been knocked off the air. Obviously, someone doesn't want you to know about this. We've gotten into some very sensitive things. Well, I'm going to sign off now. It's been good talking with people, and we'll see you.